With the Resident Evil 4 remake coming out extremely soon, I wanted to do something special. So I'm going to make my first ever tier list of all of the Resident Evil games. Remember to like and comment. Let me know if I got close to what you would rank them as, or if I'm just an absolute idiot. Either way, let's jump right into this before the Resident Evil 4 remake comes out. Shall we? Where it all began, it defined survival horror. And the only truly awful thing in this game is... But that only happens in this version. And it translates to handheld perfectly on the DS with some extra goodies. And by that, I mean knife fights. Whether you're playing it on the PS1 or the DS, you're in for some classic horror fun. This is an A-tier game, hands down. No question. It made everything better than the first one did. It's got the best unlockables, it's infinitely replayable, and 2 scenarios that play out at the same time from different perspectives where you get to see different parts of Raccoon City. It's mind-blowing. I didn't even know games could legally be made this well in 1998. This is perfect S-tier game. Great game, no doubt, but it had to follow Resident Evil 2, the gift from your chosen deity. And this just can't hold up to that standard. Plus, it didn't start the franchise like Resident Evil 1, but the introduction of the Nemesis as an unrelenting, creepy badass whose only goal is to slurp you up like a runaway Go-Gurt is terrifying. But lacking a second scenario, which both games before it have, and a campaign that feels just a bit too short, land Resident Evil 3 in the B tier. This is better than most games out there, but it's gonna be the baseline for the rest of these Resident Evil games.
Resident Evil.
No more rendered backgrounds and a creepy ass setting with some inventive baddies and fun puzzles. It's the perfect length and interesting new characters and some returning mainstays, like Claire and Chris Redfield. Minus Steve. Steve! Was I the only person laughing my ass off with joy when he finally died? I can't be. I can't be. You all hate him as much as I do.
Finally!
Either way, Steve is so freaking annoying, he keeps Code Veronica in the A tier. You, Steve. It's the first game, but cranked to 11. The characters, better. The dialogue, better. Violence, more realistic. Zombies, there are freaking Crimson Heads now. More enemies like Lisa Trevor to add a lot of story and creepiness to the Spencer Mansion. This is the first Resident Evil made perfectly. S tier, baby! The prequel to Resident Evil 1 I never knew I needed. It's got fun gameplay in the classic Resident Evil style, with the added element of being able to switch between 2 lead characters. Series veteran Rebecca Chambers and Billy.
I'm gonna call you Billy. What's wrong, Billy? Little too real for you, Billy?
Not the series' strongest characters, but neither of them are Steve level of crap. And no item boxes means a lot of forgetting where you had to put something down, only to try to find it later. B tier. The first series shift that truly redefined how we all expected Resident Evil to play. Over-the-shoulder gameplay that shoved you into the action like never before. Sure, Ashley can be a bit of a Steve, but luckily there is so much amazing packed into this game that it's all too easy to overlook her. A fun and well-told story, mercenaries mode, separate ways, and we're hit again with just awesome unlockables. That's hard to beat. This is a S tier game. Do not let this one scene ruin it for you. Resident Evil 5 is an incredible game. The first Resident Evil to be set out in the sun. If you forgot, that was a big deal. And a co-op component that is actually super fun. great set pieces, and a lot of challenging bosses, like a giant bat, the Executioner, whatever the hell this thing is. And you even have to fight series mainstays like Jill Valentine and Wesker. It's a hard choice, but A tier feels right. It's just bordering between A and S, but I believe it belongs in A tier. This gem was held back for a long time by only being released for the garbage 3DS. But even on the 3DS, this was a throwback to classic Resident Evil over-the-shoulder action. And as much as Capcom loved putting people on boats, I also really like the setting. Revelations is both scary and action-packed. The storytelling is more reminiscent of one of the CG movies, but that's okay. The setting is intriguing, the characters do a good job filling their roles, even Anime Conan over here, making a great Resident Evil. And luckily, now you don't have to own a 3DS to play it. You can play it on a real console. A tier. Capcom was afraid of giving us another short story like Resident Evil 3, I guess. But the amount of stuff in Resident Evil 6 is actually a bad thing. I wish they would have focused the storytelling more, so I didn't have to play through 4 different scenarios just to be completely baffled by this story. I still feel like Resident Evil 6 was a fever dream or something, but the gameplay is really solid, and there is just a ton of co-op goodness here. But it is hard to ignore so much convoluted storytelling. Lands this in the C tier. Another Resident Evil Revelations, and you could play it on the PlayStation Vita instead of the 3DS. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is a hell of a fun game though. Basically 2 scenarios set up in an episodic fashion, but this time around you can co-op the whole thing. The setting isn't anywhere near as memorable as Revelations 1, but there are some things Revelations 2 does better than the first. Like, its overall gameplay is more polished, but the story is just not super interesting to me, giving it the same amount of pros and cons as the first one. Truly, I can't wait for Revelations 3. This is an A tier game. Resident Evil 7 was an unexpected, genius move in my opinion, and the second style change that actually seems to be here to stay. It's got a great story with absolutely great horror pieces that are actually creepy. Good on you, Capcom. You revived the series by pulling back on the over-the-top action scenes and replaced those with some atmospheric creepiness, topped with solid gameplay and great boss fights. This is clearly an S tier game. How do you make the perfect Resident Evil 2 even better? Well, I'm not too sure that you can, but the Resident Evil 2 remake sure as hell did a good job of it, mixing up the original by changing everything enough that it felt brand new, but still extremely familiar. That's exactly what you want from a remake. And by beautifying the hell out of this nasty-ass city and disgusting monsters, moving the camera to over-the-shoulder, and improving the storytelling via better voice acting and cutscenes, Resident Evil 2 Remake is clearly an S-tier game. Just making perfecter. You know what I mean. Remember how I said Resident Evil 3 was short? This is shorter. Capcom just didn't want to remake the whole game, I guess. But what they did do was really flesh out the parts that they felt were important enough to keep. It's a real shame that Capcom just chopped this one off at the knees. It was the only Resident Evil that truly needed a remake to fix the downfalls of the original. And it does, for the most part. Resident Evil 3 Remake seriously feels like a cash grab. Capcom made this just so that they can move on and just get to Resident Evil $. I mean Resident Evil 4. B tier. I'm not calling it Village. Resident Evil 8 is very mechanically sound, just like Resident Evil 7 was, minus all of the actual horror though. And if I'm honest, the story this time around was nowhere near as memorable. Because if you could tell me the ending without looking it up, I'm both impressed and jealous, because apparently you have a better brain than I do. All I can remember is Ethan super gluing his whole ass hand back on, as if he's a goddamn Lego person or something. And Lady Triple D over here, not because she was super important or even that fun of a part in the game, it's just because the internet lost their collective minds over her. For, whoa, I don't know, you try to figure it out. Werewolves, it's not scary, and a totally forgettable story. This is B tier, but only because the gameplay is seriously that good. Thanks for hanging out with me while I've been ranking the mainline Resident Evils. Let me know what you think, whether you agree, completely disagree, which one's your favorite. Either way, come back for the next video where I completely rank all of the rest of the spin-offs. That was a weird-ass sentence, but either way, you know what I'm trying to say. I love you, and until next time, official sign-off.